So we're going to call to order the Colchester Planning Commission meeting at 7:04. So the first thing we got are agenda considerations reserved for changes to the agenda items in order. We don't have that tonight. Comments and questions from the public not related to the agenda. All good there? All right. So we get right on to public requests for amendments to development regulations. This is a leftover one we wanted to look at again. So the first one we have is SR 22-01 of Dave Burke on behalf of Jim Attell and Skip Farrell to allow for selected residential uses in the commercial district. Would you have another comment? Come right up.
Hi, David Burke, O'Leary Burke. As you said, here on behalf of Jim Antell. Jim Antell and Skip Farrell own the vacant footprint lot at High Point Center. So at High Point Center, you've got what was historically Libby's Blue Line Diner at the big office building to the right of it, and another big office building, kind of the glass one that sits closer to the road to the left of the entrance. Up behind the one that's, I'll call the glass one to the Winooski side, is another approved about 1 acre footprint lot. That was originally earmarked for another office building. In 2001, we secured town approval for a 76 unit extended stay hotel at that location. That was done, at that time, Gabe Handy owned that footprint. Skip Farrell and Jim Antell ended up buying that from him, and they're not hotel guys, but they bought it from him. Since that time, since the 2001 era, office space has been going downhill for them. The second floor of 19 Roosevelt has been empty for 8 years now. They own that. They own part of the office building to the right, I think 3 of those floors, and they own the footprint lot. So back in March of 2017, we submitted to Planning and Zoning 5.5 years ago, for consideration that apartment buildings greater than 10 units be added to the commercial district. We feel that, I'm sure you've got my letter in the package, but there's several uses, including extended stay hotel, that got approved. When the Albany School of Pharmacy was at the High Point Center, there's lots of uses that are residential that are commercial in nature, or they're commercial and they're residential in nature, however you want to see it. My feeling is that the apartment building 10 units falls in the same bucket as those 4 or 5 uses that are already listed in this district. So there was multifamily and there was apartment buildings greater than 10. My personal feeling is multifamily should be limited to 3 and 4 story, 3 and 4 unit buildings, 6 unit buildings, not the big box buildings. And that's what that's what you have out there now for office space. When we submitted in 2017, it was already empty for 3 years, that one floor, and they had an architect they spent the money on an architect to do a revamp of the building, to try to use that for marketing purposes, and just nothing's come. Once COVID hit, I don't think anybody with a straight face can believe that office space is coming back. Not at those locations, a lot of locations around Chittenden County. So what you have is an empty floor. You'll end up with more empty floors. You'll end up with the lot in the back not being utilized. And the owner, depending on this proceeding, regardless of this proceeding, probably is going to be pursuing getting his taxes lowered just because of the lack of use in those buildings. So I think it would be short-sighted not to consider adding this use, which is similar to the other uses. I disagree that it's contrary to your town plan. We're not asking for an expansion of residential use. As you see on the board now, halfway house, congregate housing, hotel, motel, extended stay, trade and vocational schools, colleges, community college, including dormitories, are already allowed in this district. So we're simply asking for apartment buildings greater than 10 units to be added to the commercial district. And we think that's more than reasonable. And it's actually more reasonable than when we first made this submittal, due to if we thought at that time that there was going to be a rush on office space. Certainly COVID has changed that, and I do not expect that office space is ever going to come back the way it did. Just a lot of businesses have decided that the employees at home save money, and the employees in a lot of cases like being at home. At the last informal discussion we had on this, on May 17th of 2022, Mrs. Austin had asked about the felt that there should be an encouragement for residential, and asked the question, how many units? And there is no proposal at this time, and there is no proposal imminent. They haven't had me or anybody else do any work. It's something that, whether it's them or whether it's another developer interested in that footprint lot for this particular use, we're asking for the consideration for it to be added as a conditional use. So any subsequent proposal will go to the Development Review Board. It'll undergo normal scrutiny of that process, plus the extra scrutiny of the conditional use process. And I think the reason that that's important is that if you add this, somebody asked last time, is this for this parcel? I can't ask for it for this parcel. I'm asking for it to be added to the commercial district. So I don't think it's going to be widespread with the uses that are already allowed that are like this. But I did look at what would happen here likely, and the 19 Roosevelt has 8,170 square feet per floor. That would likely result, after you take out hallways, etc., in about 10 to 12 units, 1 to 2 bedroom units. And then the 76 unit extended stay building footprint, that permit's expired long ago, but that would result in about 40 to 50 residential uses versus the 76, just because those extended stays are very small. The numbers that I'm using are closer to 750 square feet per unit or so. So there's in the proposal, there was that follow-up dated December 1st. Kathy Ann got a hold of me, asked if I wanted to submit anything additional. That's kind of what I just went over, a summary of it, but it's in the December 1st email. Nothing that I think I need to go over on the March 22nd, 2017 letter. The main thing are those current uses, of which most of them are conditional uses. Trade and vocational school and college universities are the only two that are permitted uses. The other three are conditional uses. So all the more reason that if this were to be added to the district, which again, I believe you have the authority to do without a town plan change. The minutes of the 22nd are in there, and there's nothing to really go over there. And then the attachment 3, back when the 76 unit building was approved for the extended stay, there's just a site plan and a rendering of what that building would look like. While it is a 4-story building, it's just the slope of the hill. When you're down on Route 7, it wouldn't be much higher than the extension of the sight line over Libby's Blue Line Diner. So that's what that is, and just to make sure I didn't skip anything, the last attachment, I think, was the April 9th staff notes, which Kathy Ann said are the ones being utilized for tonight as well. On those I didn't have a clean version, so on attachment 4 of my information, you will see a couple red marks. Those are back from May when I looked at this. And some of my comments were, this has been 5.5 years. I don't really want to hear that I need to wait for a town plan change when it's been 5.5 years. And I feel strongly that it fits within your existing commercial zone. And then on the markups that I have on page 2 are the, kind of the commercial in nature. I've had this discussion in the office on other proposals we've had, and we've got one in Castleton right now, and it's like, is this a commercial building that has residential uses? Is it a residential building that has commercial uses? It's, I think most of your big buildings kind of fall in that gray area. But I suggest it would be a missed opportunity for Colchester to not consider this and other things like this, or in your areas that were predominantly office buildings. As I said at the beginning, High Point Center, 2 office buildings in the front. The one in the back was back in 2001, when it was originally done by Mr. Wiley. That was also earmarked as an office building. Didn't make a whole lot of sense because it was all shared parking and you had 3 big office buildings. When they were all occupied, there was, and Libby's was going, and there was also, it never occurred and never will occur at this point, there was a very small footprint out there for a small bank between Libby's and the building on the Colchester side towards the interstate. But I don't need to take up more of your time, but I'm happy to try to answer questions.
Sure. Sarita?
Well, I did come up with around 62 units looking at your numbers.
Yeah, the high end I think would be about 62, and low end 50 to 62 with the 2 numbers that I gave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I felt like, for me, I felt like you make a compelling argument because of COVID. When I reread the town plan, it looks at trends in the housing unit, and those trends, they don't exist anymore. Like you said, office workers are not returning, to the office. And so I think, at some point we might want to relook at that because I think things have really shifted in terms of, commercial and residential development. But, so that's somewhat of a compelling argument for me. I don't want vacant buildings in Colchester, I want to increase our tax base. I want workers to find a place to live, and this seems, it's probably much more complicated, or maybe more complicated, but I think Kathy can help me understand that. But I find your argument compelling for this occurrence post-COVID.
What?
I know in the town plan, we were very careful saying that in the commercial business district, we really didn't want housing. We made a big effort not to have residential in that area.
Yep.
That being said, I kind of agree, we got the economics of it right now not working. It's not just this High Point Center. I think it affects Water Tower Hill. I don't know what the occupancy rate is at High Tower, Water Tower Hill. But again, we have some large buildings. I don't know if there's empty floors. If we're going to go down this route, that's what we're going to have to start looking at. Are we going to accept this more as a mixed commercial use? Or we've made a big effort not to. I don't know what other commercial districts we have.
So this is your only dedicated commercial
Right,
district?
That's what I thought. It's just this kind of core around the interstate,
This is the only one.
yeah.
Wendy,
Wendy's-
would you like to chime in too?
I agree. I think it's a very compelling argument. I'm one of those people who's displaced to home. As well as I work for the state of Vermont. Like, almost all of us are working from home now.
Yeah.
So I get it. I don't think office space is on the upswing at all.
So, yeah, so this is what I look at too, is you're in a commercial spot now, and I hate to see businesses that are there now, we change the dynamics there, because I know the quarry already just got beat up pretty good in their permitting, and had to settle out. Nothing's more important, I think, than that quarry in our town. And I hate to see us get into a residential fix in an area that never had residential, and then we create new problems for an existing business. That's really one of my fears. The reason the master plan came up with that was just that reason. We wanted a commercial spot that, because we like, diversity in the town. And you're right, it's probably more diversified to put in some residential. I don't know if that's the future in 5 years from now, or if that's all we got for today. But we can't continually do residential and not have some type of, imagination on what we gotta do to make that building and that area work. I don't know if you've worked with Kathy, and she has any other ideas in Walker, because we do have a economic, branch here.
It's
And I
been,
don't-
yeah, it's been years, and the owners also worked with Kathy.
Yeah.
But that particular location, I think largely because it was originally envisioned as office space. Now, the commercial obviously has other uses that are already there.
Right.
But the ones that have taken hold and haven't gone away, at least for now, I mean, they're on leases, but like the ground floor is a dentist. Whether he'll stay, they don't know. But those seem to be the uses that can occur. Again, I don't see that it's much different than uses that you already have in the district, the ones I've noted. And the conditional use, gives it that extra scrutiny, which I think is helpful, because I'm not they don't have a proposal to do this.
Correct.
It's just,
get that.
they're drawing straws right now, saying, boy, that's been vacant for 8 years now, and it was vacant for almost 3 years when we made the submission.
Yeah.
And they had suggested other things, and having been the ex-zoning board chair of Colchester, I said, no, that's not gonna work, that's not gonna work. That might work, that's similar to what you have now. That's where I was coming from, and I felt comfortable, straight face test 5.5 years ago. I feel very comfortable, not that any of us wanted COVID, but, after that was residential property before.
Yep.
So there was 3 units on that property, that whole area was residential.
Yep, absolutely.
And the duplex was there when I first got involved in this. The duplex was the last thing torn down on
Yep.
that piece. When the 76-unit extended stay hotel got approved, the quarry was involved in that process, and it's just a matter of having the legal documents recognizing that it's a quarry there and that the people can't,
Yeah.
complain afterwards, because it is gonna be a choice that people make to live there, because they're gonna get the occasional noise, at that location. As I said, half an hour ago or 20 minutes ago, I think it's short-sighted not to consider it.
Yeah.
But
So for our board, it looks like we want to consider it.
Yes, and I don't know
That will be
whether it
just,
affects the town plan.
so that's,
And-
that's another
and
thing
the
we have
regs.
to look at, is we had the town plan, right? And what you're talking about back in the town plan days was the transition. Because there was a house there, the owner that owned that property lived in the house. And so we went from all residential now to commercial, and now we want to put some residential right in the middle of what, at that time, was the whole idea was commercial. Like I said, for the diversity part. So do we go back to residential again, or do we overlook our town plan. And I get the idea that when we put the town plan together, sometimes it doesn't make it to the end with the changes we want. The idea with the town plan is put it together and then we let it run and see what happens.
Well,
COVID did make a big change.
But we're
in a way.
talking conditional use, we're not talking about changing the zoning here
Yep.
to residential.
It does change the zoning. I would caution, and I've made this case for many years, conditional use does not mean, and there are a lot of boards that misuse conditional use. Conditional use does not mean we'll pick the ones we want and say no to the ones we don't.
Right.
There's a very strict standard. You say yes to conditional use, you're pretty much saying yes to anything as long as it doesn't have there's state criteria that you follow, but you can't pick and choose one lot over a next in conditional use. And I would encourage you that if at some point you do reach a determination to allow any residential use here, whether it is in the next 6 months, in the next 6 years, in the next town plan, wherever that happens, you avoid, and I will make this argument again, you will avoid making it a conditional use. You either want it there or you don't. And conditional uses are a very slippery slope that should be limited to certain things that can be dramatically different based on what, a retail use, for example, is very different when it's a Costco versus a 2,000 square foot local grocer. That might have some applicability for conditional use, but a 10-unit building is a 10-unit building. So I guess I would just caution, whatever you do, don't rely on conditional use to be a determining factor for you.
No, I just meant that it's
Yeah.
still gonna be a commercial zone. It's not gonna be a residential zone.
It is a residential use.
Yeah.
We'll allow residential.
As soon as you allow residential, you will see residential. I think everybody knows the market, and I think that's kind of the point, right?
Well, the district already allows residential. I disagree that it's a change of zoning. I mean,
You're talking about.
I've been working for 37
Yeah.
years in Colchester.
I-
Colchester has done conditional use right most of the time. So I just disagree with that.
Yeah.
And I disagree that it's a change of zoning. I'm asking for a use to be added to the commercial district that is consistent with
It is.
residential uses that are already allowed in the district. There was a
Different flavor.
76-unit hotel.
Yep, different flavor.
A
extended
hotel
stay.
is not an
Extended
apartment
stay.
building.
A different.
You ask our
flavor.
tax
How's
office, you
that
ask our
different than
economic
apartment
development
buildings?
office, you can ask our select board.
Yeah.
They pay very different taxes. They have a very different draw
Yeah.
on our services.
Yeah, the customer.
I will
base-
disagree with Mr. Burke all day long that an apartment building is not a residential use, and I think that 99% of people and 100% of planners will tell you that an apartment building is a residential use.
Yeah.
It is a residential use.
It's as
That's not what
residential
I said.
as a single-family house.
It's
it
as
is.
residential as extended stay.
It is absolutely
It's-
not.
That's, and I have checked with, the town's got plenty of sewer.
Yeah.
I checked with Brian Osborne 5 years ago.
Yeah,
There's no there's a light at that location,
Yeah.
so it has to meet all those criteria, and it has to go through the process if it were to happen. But this is not a change in zoning.
one thing I
This
will
is-
agree on, 2 different animals. Extended stay and residential, still 2 different animals. Just in the flavor of the people, once you're in your apartment, you now have a home, you now have ownership. You're committed. Extended stay, you're there, somebody comes in, cleans you up, you're gone. Wait, 5 days, 5 months, you're still gone. You're
And you
not.
like that better than?
I don't know,
You know,
it's
that's
different, because the ownership is different and the management of your customer base is different. I think that's what we're afraid of, what I'm personally afraid of, is to say Water Tower Hill is a good example. At one time, I was all about putting this monster apartment above, get $1 million condo unit up above. But the problem was, that $1 million condo all of a sudden wants to have changes, and they have a big voice in it because they are a residential unit, and you are in a different animal for the commercial world versus the residential. For one thing, the commercial world is 24/7, runs every day, all day. And in the residential world, not so much. Sometime along you're going to sleep. Commercial may never sleep. And people seem to get upset about when they want to sleep, and that truck comes rolling in, the lights fire up in the office building. Now that's, for me personally, that's what I fear. And I don't, like I said, I don't want to see a business that's been there for decades get attacked all of a sudden because we changed the use around them. You know what I mean? That's really what I fear myself.
They-
Even though it is a good argument that we need more residents, but we have the growth center now that's, you know, tooling along at its pace, it's tooling along, but it has a lot of residents happening.
If this proceeded, would they not be part of the, they would be noticed, and their voice would be heard.
Sure.
So it's not like something's being changed without their knowledge, and that may be enough for it not to go through.
Mm-hmm.
But,
I understand.
as I said, this was submitted in 2017, and I was told then, I forget what the issue was, but there wasn't the opposition from staff that there is now.
Right,
You're the board that gets to decide.
right.
So,
Just to be clear, there's no opposition from staff in examining the issue. The question is, does this rise to a conflict with the town plan? And I think that's very obvious to me that it does. Now, you could choose to open that town plan back up and have this discussion. And however you want to have the discussion, I disagree that it's a small thing. This is the town's only business district. And it may very well be appropriate to add some or a whole lot of residential to this district. The question is, who gets to be the people that are invited to that discussion? And I think it's a much bigger discussion. I think you want your business owners. I think you want your economic development office there. I think you want it to be part of your town plan. That's the very purpose of a town plan. It's 2 years of outreach. It's 2 years that people put into coming to these meetings. You were in communities, neighborhoods. This was talked about then, and it was decided no. And it may very well be different, and now it should be, or maybe a yes. But those same people should have their voice heard. They had their voice heard then, and to overturn that without opening that conversation back up seems really disingenuous to anyone who showed up. That said, the other thing that we've talked about is there's probably a real need to look at where housing should be town-wide. I don't think we're looking at this in a bubble, right? I think you're going to hear 2 other requests tonight for other areas of town. To look at just a district and your only commercial district alone without considering where the full scope of increased residential should be also seems like you're doing it in the dark when there could be a bigger picture look, which is done again as part of your town plan.
the best place for your residential uses is always gonna be where you have municipal water and sewer, and it's very limited in Colchester. This is one of those locations.
That is true.
You know, I did look at the town plan, and, you know, it talks a lot about current trends. It talks about, you know, the housing and population has stabilized, small steady gains, trend will likely continue over the term of this plan. And that's just not accurate anymore due to COVID.
Sure.
So, you know, I agree that I probably wouldn't be supportive about looking at the town plan, but it's not current right now. That the housing piece is not current as far as I'm concerned. The demand for housing in Vermont is dire. And, you know, this combination of not using office space, you know, having vacant buildings, and being able to possibly put in like, you know, 72 units of housing. I look at the interchange, you know, on 89, you know, that's gonna be walkable now. You know, people could be able to walk and go to work and not have to drive a car again, kind of moving the trend in
Sure.
terms of climate change, making walkability. And I just think it will fit nicely with Winooski. I mean, Winooski's main road is gonna come up to us, you know, and they're all, that's all working towards a walkable, commercial, residential space. So, I just think if we're looking at just the 2019 plan, there was also there was an economic study. There was one in 2014, but there was also a supplement. Do you remember that in 2017? I don't know if you remember when we were looking at the town plan. But it talked a lot about infill, you know, that Colchester, you know, specifically that Colchester should be looking for infill and not, you know, again, taking up more.
Yeah, that's why we did the PUD down to 1.5.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So,
And that has been working.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
With the same idea that the growth center still is a majority part of our growth
yeah.
for residential and also commercial
Yeah,
mix.
but I do think in other towns, Essex, Williston, I mean, they're doing it, they're doing commercial and residential, and making it.
They're having a required mix.
What?
They have a required mix. You can't just build residential in their growth centers, in those newly built
So there's a
areas.
percentage
Hmm?
of,
Usually the first floor has to be commercial, similar to what Severance Corners was supposed to be.
yeah.
Kind of hasn't kept exactly there. Seems like there's three ways to go. One would be, my preference would be that you would agree with me. That it does not require, that it is consistent with the other residential type uses in this district, and it does not require town plan approval. Second would be, I think more what I'm hearing from Kathy Ann is, I'm not opposed to it, but it obviously requires a town plan change. And then the third one would be, we're just not interested.
Right.
I think Kathy makes a good point about the context of housing in Colchester. I just feel like that will take 3 years, and, I think the need for housing now and, these vacant buildings just sitting there now, it's concerning to me.
Of course, yeah. And I think when you have this conversation, you're going to hear probably a lot of what came up in your last town plan discussion, and there is a concern, whether or not you think it's a big concern or a worthy concern or not, is that right now housing is so in demand that anywhere it is allowed, it is all you are seeing. And that's something to consider. And again, I'm not saying that should stop you from allowing this in any way, but you have to look at all of the potential, I don't want to use the word consequences, but the effects, right? Housing is so much in demand, you will never see another commercial building built up there if residential is allowed. It's just, those are the numbers, and anybody who is seeing that.
But can
Okay.
we limit it? Can we?
So again, that's, when you have a discussion, that's what comes up, and I guess this just goes to the point of it's not checking a box. To me, it's a bigger conversation. There's a lot of things to consider, and I'm not here to give my opinion on that whatsoever.
Well, I know it'll be more.
Very interested in housing, and you probably won't find a bigger advocate. I signed on to the county's campaign. It's just making sure that you don't just jump in head first, and you consider a lot that has gone into what was written already, and you consider what has changed, and you talk to your economic development office. You get a good idea of tax impacts that could arise from these changes. Nobody creates a new future land use map without looking at what it does to the tax base. And there's numbers. I mean, this can be actually a pretty scientific approach. You start to look at your change in I'm just making up numbers here, 80% residential becomes 90% residential in your town. Your tax base changes quite a bit. Not the least of which is that we keep saying commercial. This is also, there are light industrial uses allowed here as well. That's also a very different impact on your tax base than your commercial use, and different impacts, which may or may not, go away due to the competing pressures and highest and best use, right?
It'd be nice if there was a magic business coming in, because it's nice to have housing, but we also need a place for people to work,
Yes.
But
So
we don't want to limit.
They need to live somewhere, and right now we can't grow economically as a state because there's no housing, and workers can't find a place to live here.
Sure.
That's really hurting Vermont, so it's concerning me, 'cause it just means.
One possibility for this piece, and it's certainly not solved in this discussion tonight, but maybe if it went the town plan route, is the intent, again, there's no proposal, the intent is not to do away with commercial. This, again, fits, I think, with those uses that are already there. But one thing that could occur is Kathy Ann mentioned in Williston and other towns, is if it were approved, maybe the most appropriate way to approve it is either on a per property or per building requirement of 50%, no more than 50% or something, whatever that percentage is, that it stays, that the building and the property still has the commercial component, And depending on what that percentage is, you may benefit greatly in that some of the people may choose to live where they work. So I would agree that you don't want these 3 buildings to become residential. I don't think you would see that, but one way to make sure that doesn't happen would be regulations that kind of went in that direction, limiting the residential component.
Take it over here.
Well, I just think it's gonna take more involvement in analyzing what's going on in Colchester. As Kathy Ann said, talking to all the different stakeholders in this, because I know, the history that, we really pushed hard to get a commercial center in Colchester, and that's why there's water and sewer there, it's for the commercial buildings. I think it's a bigger element than just saying, yeah, let's have residential. I think it's a big.
And I think part of the reason I brought this back to you this month is that this is when you're also setting your work plan. So it's, your town plan, if that's the route you end up going, is not due until 2026, 2027. But that doesn't mean you can't open it up early. And you may do that anyway, because we've talked about, doing a new open space plan. Once you get that worked out, that's going to impact your future land use plan. So every plan is a future land use plan. And the second you finish that work, you're probably looking at some amendments in there that are based on that. It's certainly ripe. And if
You don't have to.
No, all right.
You're new.
Can you just explain to me what the difference, I'm new at this, difference between the conditional and changing, those are 2 very different things, but they accomplish the same?
I feel they are. It sounds like Kathy Ann may disagree, but you got permitted uses and you have conditional uses. So if you are in a permitted use, you should expect that you're going to get approval. If you're in a conditional use, it's case by case.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Conditional sounds like it's temporary, though. That's not.
Conditional brings in more of component of the neighbors, and most boards, and Kathy Ann is right, that sometimes they deviate for the good or the bad from the standards based on public input.
you've probably been on the certain
I've been on
side of
both
that.
sides of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when I was zoning board chair, I saw both sides of it.
Yeah. So conditional use criteria, there's 5 criteria that come from the state, and the one that gets used and abused far too often is that people think that it refers to the character of the area, and that's actually not the language, but it's the one that comes up a lot in a hearing. So you see a new residential development, this happens all the time, and you have a conditional use, and the neighbors come out and say, that doesn't fit the character of the area because my house doesn't look like that. And all too often decisions are made based on that, which does create sort of a case-by-case basis when it really shouldn't. Really what it should be doing is treating everything the same, and it's based on a planned character. And again, if your planned character is residential, just say yes to residential and don't make it conditional on anything. And there's some other things like the availability of services and stuff, most of which are pretty easy to check off on a list. But I don't think it's as much about whether or not it's conditional or permitted. It's more about whether or not, I think the difference that Dave and I are having is whether or not an apartment building is residential and whether or not residential would require a change to the plan where it says no residential. I think, without putting words in his mouth, is he saying? It's not new residential.
Yeah, well, that's where I started. It's a residential use, it's commercial in nature, or it's a commercial use, it's residential in nature, same as those uses that are already conditional uses. So if you were to go down the road of getting rid of conditional use, you should get rid of them on the 4 that are already in that district that are conditional uses.
Yeah,
I wouldn't encourage you to do that. I'd encourage you to keep conditional uses.
Those that are considering residential that are in there now, I would put that in the transitional, it's transient housing. It's not people that are there
Versus home,
permanent.
versus homes, like Richard
Versus
said.
living there for a
Yeah.
year or more. So that's the difference to me, what's conditional in the commercial zone versus residential.
Yeah, fair enough. Is there enough interest for you to consider it in
Yeah,
your?
this is where we're
Now, I
at.
thought you were 2019 on your town plan, which wouldn't that be 2024 that you should be
It's 8 years now.
8 years now?
Yeah.
That another was a COVID.
No, that was pre-COVID.
That was
That was
pre-COVID?
pre-COVID.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We went from 5 years to 8
Eight.
years.
Yeah, that was.
Which if you're on the board, you're pretty happy about that actually, but if you want
I-
changes, not so much.
I know, yes, yeah, I know which,
And it is your,
most town plans in most towns come about a year and a half, always were coming about at 6.5 anyway.
yeah,
Most of them
Yeah.
weren't meeting the
Yeah.
5 year.
yeah, exactly.
It's hard.
And we'll probably
Yeah.
start right in there.
That doesn't
gonna
mean you
take a
can't
couple
do it
years.
early, and it doesn't mean that you'd have to do a full rewrite either.
That's what I was wondering.
You know, most town plans, when they're done, it's a full dive, it's everything. We're gonna do it, we're gonna do everything, but that's not a requirement.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
I just, again, I think it's not, I think this trend of working from home is the future. And I think people really like the idea of possibly not driving far or being other modes of transportation to get to work. And I think for Vermont's economy, especially if we want to keep Vermont affordable, we have to increase our base of taxpayers. And they can't move here, businesses can't move here, and people can't move here without housing. So that is why I am in favor of, I know it's more work for the planning office, but I think, I don't want to wait 3 years and then be here, having to do it. I think we should just do it because I don't think things are going to change.
See, now, my thought is, it is a commercial use place, this commercial building may not be an office building, but hopefully somebody can figure out what its next life is going to be, and provide jobs, hopefully good paying jobs for these people, even though if you wanna live in the state, I realize it's not cheap, you still need a good paying job, and that'll get you from point A to point B for a place to live. And this place is great. I mean, you're right off the interstate. We do have water, sewer. They have internet connections. There's a lot of bonuses here to be a commercial unit. Now, what it will be in the future, I can't answer that. I was hoping maybe Dave had,
No,
but he hasn't got an
after-
answer for that either. No, I get it. You're
They've hired
looking-
other consultants, and as I
Yep.
said, the architect, and they've got that one floor that's been vacant for 8 years. They would love to have that next use. And even if you said tonight, yes, we're gonna do this, and 6 months from now it was in there,
Yeah.
if that next use came along, they'd gladly accept
Sure.
it, but it's been 8 years. You know, so-
Curiosity, why one floor, 8 years?
Well, that particular building, they only own the middle floor, and the upper floor is, I think he said either 40% full or 60% full, I forget which, and he said they're hardly ever there, and the ground floor has been pretty good. So,
Hmm.
I didn't get into any of that,
Okay.
other than to know that they thought it was a big thing, that they spent money on the architect to kind of revamp the building, to say, and I kind of chuckling about it because everything's come full circle.
Yeah.
Those glass buildings that were ugly for 20 years are now coming back around again. So I think that building probably fits in the future, where it might not have fit the last 20 years. So I think it would be sobering if the board had, not just Colchester, if they had Chittenden County numbers on vacancies.
Yeah.
It's sobering. And I think people would like to live in these commercial areas where they can walk to work and walk to the store and do these things. But it sounds like that's a much bigger conversation with town plan.
I personally think it is awesome. So our
I think
discussion,
it is too.
so do we, I guess our next thing is, do we move it on as not a deal, or do we move it on as a discussion deal? I assume this is where we're at.
I put down B for me, which was,
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Which one was B, just for the
is
audience?
that we're not approving it now, but that we're gonna either do a study or do something to get more information, or more of an informed decision.
So I just wanted to quickly respond to something you had said, Sarita, about more work for staff. And I just want to, as we talk about the work plan in 2023, it's not a matter of more work for me or not. I think that there's only so many hours that staff and yourselves can, and the community can budget to a project or sets of projects. And whatever you want those hours to be is entirely up to you. And I will do whatever it is you want to do. Just know it's like anything else with a budget, right? You do one thing, you can't do another. And whatever ends up on your list, I fully support working with you on. Just know that there's opportunity costs too.
Yep.
You decide what they are. It does not create more work for me. I'm still only going to do my 50 hours a week. But that's what it is.
Yeah.
And it's your hours. We're not having 4 meetings a month to make up for it. It just means something else doesn't get done. That's all.
Rebecca, what do you think?
I agree, we should table it. Yeah,
Table it and.
B.
yeah,
B,
that's
is that
B. B is table.
Table, B, yeah.
Revisit later.
Yes,
Later.
yeah. So
And you can even talk about it later tonight if you want, in
Sure.
terms of what's coming up in FY '23.
Mm.
You might say, open space, open space, we don't care, I don't know.
Wendy?
But-
What do you think? You okay with that?
Yep.
Running
I
on
am.
B? Majority rules on this
All
board.
right, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we move on. SR 22-04 of Elias, Erwin, on behalf of Cody Rice to request zoning changes of a portion of property on Blakely Road from Ag District to Residential 1.
Yeah, that's right. That about summarizes it. Not much different has changed since April.
Yeah?
Although a new face. Hi, Wendy. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. I'm Elias Erwin of Landmark Engineering and Design out of Middlebury, Vermont.
Nice to
Here
meet you.
representing Cody Rice and the Rice family with the subject 86-acre parcel, which is on Blakely Road. And have you read the letter, David?
I did.
Okay, great.
Yep.
So really, guys, nothing much has changed. In fact, I'm here because I was invited back. So I was thinking maybe you guys had some positive findings from our last session. Is that right?
Mostly it's because it was a discussion from the last time,
Yeah.
and we decided we wanted to hear more and think more about it. That's really why you're back here.
Good. Okay,
So
great. So what do you? Yeah,
You
let's hear it.
had, you wanted to cut the front piece off, go to R1.
30% of the subject 86-acre parcel.
Right, and at that time, you did not really know what you exactly wanted to put in for units.
Well, that's
or how
right. We're
many.
just looking to have the
So-
ability to do so, sir.
Right.
Again, we're just in the infancy conceptual phase here.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, being currently zoned as ag, it's very restrictive. As you know, it's 1 living unit per 25 acres.
Correct.
If we got an R1 designation, which is adjacent to the parcel, both to the east and west, I believe, you have R1 and R2 districts that are immediately adjacent to the parcel, that would then allow 1 residential unit per 30,000 square feet, just less than an acre. So really, we don't have any plans yet, but
Right.
Through your help and through the guidance of the town, we can come up with something that's beneficial to everybody. I
Right.
know our client's interested in maybe some multi-unit affordable housing, maybe in the back portion, maybe some larger lots for some single-family residences. Really, the property is ripe and it's a perfect area for it. There's well-drained soils. Yeah, there might be some wetlands, but we'll deal with all that through the permitting process. But for now, none of that can happen without getting that zoning designation
Right.
change. Not a
So-
conditional use or anything, but an actual zoning change.
Right, so you,
Yep.
again, there was 23 acres,
Yeah, that's right.
R1,
Yep,
Kathy's gonna
yep.
give the view on it.
As displayed, I think it was figure 3 in my application
Yep.
package.
That's the right one, right?
That's right there, right?
But you can see, and reading through the plans and the regs, we talk about spot
Kathy, there's
zoning
another one.
and reducing spot zoning, and
Go further down.
and we approached you
Oh.
guys in accordance with 2.03D that allows for people to come
Right,
in and
around
ask
this.
the board for a change, and that's where we are.
So, yeah, so you're caught under the
Here's
same,
one that shows how he's gonna divide it.
yeah, there's another one, which one? Yep.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the current zoning,
Yeah.
just so you have an idea of where the ag is and the current
Yep,
R1, the current ag.
Yeah, and we would use that unnamed tributary as
Correct.
a boundary, as a natural
plus.
boundary.
Yep.
Mhm. And, you know, you guys know that parcel being in residents of Charlotte, or excuse me, Colchester. I don't believe that land is still being used for agricultural purposes. It's a vacant lot. As far as I know, it's just sitting there, and it will continue to remain that way. And in the meantime, I hear about the shortage of housing and the need for residential
But
housing.
we do
and, yeah,
definitely address that.
sure.
Regardless of all the shortage of housing, I'll say one thing, Colchester
Yeah.
is definitely on the ground
Yeah.
working on that.
Yeah, good.
That argument, it's a good argument, I realize we have shortage of housing, but
Yeah.
Colchester is moving forward like a rocket on that.
Sure.
We've got some serious developments out
Sure.
there,
Yeah.
ongoing now.
I've seen it. Yeah. but-
Starting off, so I agree that we
It's-
do have residential, but we also have,
Yep.
again, diversity in the town, where that was one-time agriculture, it's also open space.
Yep.
It has some other uses that have not been utilized, nobody's decided to do anything with it
Right.
so far. Maybe they bought it to look at it, and they
Yep.
enjoy it. It is a beautiful piece of property right there.
Yep.
Fortunately, it is right on top of the interstate, it does have a noise factor, it has a lot of wetlands on it too,
Yep. It
which I
does.
understand.
It does.
So, that part I get.
Yeah, we're looking to explore all those options further.
Correct, so the same thing happens, you run into the master plan,
Yeah.
which we had discussed years ago. Nobody had any objections to leaving that open at the time, and when the owner that had bought it at that time. So the question now is, it's almost spot zoning, I get it. It's an extension, but it's almost spot zoning because we're picking that one piece of property. State doesn't still like that. The state really isn't really big on board on us taking anything out of ag to begin with. And
The
we
state,
do-
you said?
The state themselves do not like that. You know, we do answer the state, we do answer to, obviously, Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission.
Yeah.
You know, what we do there, that our master plan had to be presented to them and approved at the time.
Mhm.
And that's an important piece of what we do. And you must know that anyways, you've done other pieces in Chittenden County, so they must have run into the same criteria.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of which state rules you're referring to specifically.
Active.
Act 250 does not
Yeah.
like
Okay,
us.
but that's
And we
subject to
have
the
it, and we've had,
landowners.
what you run into there too would
Yeah.
be, and I'm sure it hasn't disappeared, I haven't heard the word in a while, but prime ag soil comes up all
Yeah.
the time.
Right,
You know,
and that
that's
comes
not a
up through the
problem.
Act 250 permitting process.
Yes, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you.
But again, we're not there yet.
No,
We
I
just
got it.
simply want to see if
Yeah,
whether
you
or
wanna
not
see
you
where
guys,
we're
it's
at.
in your
That's
hands.
where,
It's in
that's
your
what I
hands.
think we would have the discussion on.
Yep.
For ourselves. What do you think, Sarita?
Well, I think this fits into this whole discussion of looking at housing in Colchester. I don't particularly want to give up ag soil. I just don't.
Right.
You know, I think the trend is to try to get people to live closer to where they can shop and go to work and stuff like that, so that kind of is, and I think at Severn's Corners, you know, hopefully that's gonna be a fabulous, you know, environment to do that, so,
I only brought up the residential housing because I heard it before and I'm hearing it again.
yeah,
Yep.
And I didn't say it, you guys did.
Yep.
So this is an opportunity. I
Right.
just want to make that clear.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good, thank you.
So I'm hesitant at this point, until we, have a bigger picture, like you're talking about, Kathy, in terms of kind of looking at how this is gonna impact this and this is gonna impact this. I'm hesitant to,
I think that, if we were sitting around having a conversation, working on the future land use map and a whole idea of future land use plan, I think that there is this gap there, and I think it would definitely be a discussion point. It would be probably a hearty discussion there, because there is this little baby gap
Yeah.
that this sort of fills.
And across the road, there's
But-
several homes there, aren't there?
But I think that conversation, again, is part of that
conversation.
broader land use discussion. And I think we've had a lot of discussions tonight. We'll probably have it again as we talk about open space. Because I think we'll have trade-offs, right? If we're looking at how we examine forest blocks and fragmentation and different sorts of wetland protections, and whether or not, we should be allowing 1-mile roads dividing up parcels in the rural parts of town. Those trade-offs might be that, okay, maybe that's not the right place for it, but where, along a busy corridor, that's a question that'll come up for discussion, I think, that is a worthy question. And it'll probably stimulate a very good conversation. But I think you do it, again, I'm protecting a plan that was written by, that I had nothing to do with. But I do it because I also want to make sure that when we do a plan and work together, and you guys work very, very hard on a plan, that you can have faith that the plan that you put together is the one that will be in place until it gets revised. So it's, I think,
There isn't,
to me, about defending that plan right now. It's not whether or not it makes sense, because
that
there's a good
Parcel.
argument.
is a nice piece of agriculture. We just never had anybody that had ownership in it that wanted to do more than that already was there. They were happy with it. And that's a good example of land that, if agriculture was to disappear in Colchester, that'd be a good way to start. For one thing, I think it becomes landlocked for agriculture once you do that.
Mhm.
There is no
Yeah.
frontage, there is no road.
It's unfortunate, but that's the
back here.
case.
Yeah.
It's,
Do we have the?
it's,
You
I'd call it defunct ag land. So I take it,
Oh, yeah, there is no road.
Hang on a minute.
No.
Yeah.
But, yeah, as you said, on paper, it looks more correct,
Right.
saying that the housing kind of continues towards the interstate and crosses over the interstate. But then we get into this issue of spot zoning. I think we have to put it in the category, we kind of have to look at this holistically again.
Some more discussion.
Yeah.
and if it's beneficial, we can maybe address all the criteria as defined in Article 2.03, specifically all of the subsections pertaining to D. Impact to growth, public investment, use impact, natural resources, agricultural resources. You know, just using the development regs as a
Act
guideline.
250?
Excuse me?
Are you talking about Act 250, Chapter 2?
Excuse me?
You said Article 2, or do you mean?
No,
Article
I
2
mean
from-
the Colchester Development Regulations, specifically page 2, Article 2, page 4. You know, that's what we have to go for guidance, is your own recommendations and regs.
Mm.
So we're just trying to help you, or help this along by giving you the information you need in accordance with your own regulations. I hear that we're up against the town plan, but in that specific section, yeah, it's not clear to me. Maybe we can review that together at a later date, or maybe we can all look at that but if you think it will help, we can address each one of those specific subsections and get that to you in writing, so you can take your time and review it and digest it and see if it makes sense.
Keep looking at me. That sounds like a good plan to me. I
Yeah.
prefer to read things.
Yeah, so we should pursue this further?
Yeah.
Does that mean you will too then?
Yes, I will.
Yeah, I mean, the board.
So,
Richard, you're probably more familiar with this property.
yeah,
Because it's
I'm
on
not
the road.
real big on, it's an ag piece right now, it's an ag piece at its time. I'm not real big on changing it out. I'm just not at this point in time.
Stuck.
It is what it is, where it is. Either the owner that has it now wants to work it as an ag piece, that's why they bought it, or they bought it to put some housing on it. I understand that housing's a big deal now, and I'd like to recoup some money out of the corner out of it.
I think
But
they
my
saw it as a great
problem is-
opportunity.
Yeah, the problem is for me, again, it's no different than the commercial section, residential. The way property works, it kind of like hides the ag in the back. So if you don't want to see it, you're not going to see
What
it.
did you say?
The way it's laid out,
Yeah.
the ag is hidden in the back. But once you put the houses up front, now you're going through there to do ag in the back.
Yeah.
If somebody at one day wants to work the
That's-
land.
I don't think that's the intent of our,
And
of our
I
clients.
understand that, I
Yeah.
understand where you're at. And residential's a big hot item right now, I
Right.
get that.
Yep.
But for myself personally, I'm thinking this land it's in the master plan as it is for a reason. I'm big on leaving it that way for now. That's my own.
Well, the other thing I look at is the watershed going through there.
Sure.
Because I know the houses across the street, all their basements flood because of the water that goes through there.
Yeah.
Mm.
And you're talking about that whole section having that branch come through and then the top branch can come through. It may not be great.
Oh, well, be sure we'll avoid all the setbacks and isolation distances and floodways and flood hazard zones.
I know, but that doesn't stop
Yeah.
the water coming in their basements.
Right.
It may not be the greatest parcel to put housing on.
Yeah. Well, we can't evaluate it for that until we
No.
can get the zoning to support it.
That property could support 3 houses as is, and they could be PUD'd out to a corner as is.
Is that a question or a statement?
That's a question, to make sure I'm stating correctly.
What's the size?
So it's 86, correct?
Yeah, it is 86 acres.
Yeah.
I don't think it would meet road frontage requirements. We haven't looked into that. Again, we're just looking
Yeah,
for a
no,
zoning
I
change.
get that, I get
Yeah.
that part. No,
Yeah.
as is, I believe it could do that. I'm just saying they could.
Yeah,
put a
pure
house.
density.
If they really want to put some houses in there, it's possible. Just saying that, it
Yeah.
is possible. So we wouldn't shut down residential 100%. They would still have the opportunity to put some residential in there.
They do,
If we
as it's
do.
currently zoned.
Yeah,
You know, and it's odd though. I think being agricultural use, they don't even allow for accessory structures.
Well, yeah, I mean,
And so you
it's,
couldn't, even if you wanted it for agricultural purposes, you couldn't have a farmhand house. Unless it's on its own separate lot.
yeah, without going too far down the rabbit hole,
Yeah.
we've
Bit of
created.
an oddity in your regs.
Yeah.
but-
So it's something that I was planning on bringing to you as part of an open space look is, right now we do have this low density ag, but you carve that up into 3 lots, you're almost as intensive as if you're putting in a lot of homes, depending on how you're forced to carve those
right,
up and how your roads are and what you're clearing, and
right.
you're not preserving ag in any way just by being low density.
Yep.
But again, I don't think that's something we can solve quickly.
Sure.
It's part of a bigger conversation about
Yep.
what open space values do you have and how do you want to see that play out in development?
So our discussion at this point in time is, where would we like to go with this?
I don't want to move on this at this point. I just want to dismiss it.
Dismiss it? There we go. That's all right. What do you think?
I kind of put it in the pool of looking at everything holistically if we're talking about housing. So it kind of goes back to our earlier discussion to kind of table it so we can look at where we are in Colchester as far as.
So that's option
housing
B,
uses. That's option B.
Okay.
and dismiss it as what, option A?
C.
That's C.
Okay.
That would be the,
Yeah.
A would be approved as well.
not this round for
That
this one.
means we take it
but-
up right now.
Yeah, A means we take it up right now. What do you think, Wendy? Have enough time to
I'm
discuss?
going with B.
You're going to be, so I
Yeah.
would definitely go with the dismiss part. So we're kind of split on that one. I don't know.
I can move to B.
There you go.
I can move to
So
B.
we're going to have another discussion.
I mean, but in the context.
Yeah,
of-
I think-
And
Well-
again, like you said, we can discuss it again. Apparently, we haven't wrapped our heads around it.
What I'm hearing from you, though, is a little bit different than the discussion you had 6 months ago. It's sort of like table it, but not necessarily 6 months from now when we have more time. It's table it until we have done the work that goes into it,
Right.
which I think was different than, I think 6 months ago, it was like, gosh, we're focused on East Lake Shore. We don't even want to think about this right now. And that was like, table it until we have time to really talk about it.
Okay,
I'm hearing a different type of table it from you tonight.
right. So
Um,
there you go.
Does that
It
represent?
doesn't feel like I can make an informed decision. The other one, I seem pretty clear, because I think the whole idea of going to the office is gonna be either a hybrid or it's not gonna happen. I don't see everybody going back to an office in the future.
Well, I think realistically, what's going to happen is you guys are going to sit down and look at the whole land use map across Colchester, either as part of your open space work or part of dedicated work related to your town plan, and say, okay, what has changed for us? Now that we're looking at these things, what makes sense? And all of this is probably going to come out as part of that.
All right, so we're continuing on the discussion of it.
Yeah, very
All right.
good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Absolutely.
I feel like I was being interviewed.
It's an ongoing discussion. We have time. We're good. All right. SR 22-05, Rich Gardner to request zoning change of a portion of a property on 270 Pond Road.
Good luck, Rich.
Come on up, back to residential one.
We're back.
Yes.
Based on what I've heard, I have a guess where this is going. So I own a rather large portion of land on Mill Pond Road. The parcels of land to the north, south, and west are all zoned R1. I don't, can they see the map? Is there a pic,
Yeah,
is there a
there's a
screen in front? All right,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so what I was looking to request was, a zoning change for about 15 acres, of,
Sorry, Rich, this is the only one you submitted, right?
yes.
Okay, I'll bounce between that and the zoning map
Okay.
as well.
So I'll let her pull the zoning map up of it. So I was requesting a zoning change for that portion. It is currently zoned agricultural. We'd had discussions at the last meeting. I do have the ability to do a PUD and create residential development there, so it's, the zoning change for me doesn't necessarily change what I can do. It changes how I can sell it, and it changes the ownership of that. So should I move forward to do a PUD or a planned unit development, I will end up taking the entire parcel and turning it to a residential parcel, which is totally fine and legal. What I would like to do, though, is create the type of development or the type of neighborhood that I grew up in, where if my neighbor wants to have a garden in their backyard, they can do that. They do not need to ask me or their neighbors for permission. If they want to put up a fence or a shed, it would all be completely legal within inside of the regulations of the town, so they could do that. And I'd prefer to have neighbors that way, where I don't have control over their land and they don't have control over mine.
Am I in the right spot here, Rich? Is this
You
it?
are, that is it.
And it goes all the way back to the
It goes
town
all the way
line?
back to Essex, yeah.
Okay.
How
Actually, I
many
think it's,
acres is it again?
well, that's another interesting question. By deed or by what I think it actually is, it hasn't been surveyed in a while. By deed, I'm just shy of 98 acres. I think it's actually much larger than that. I've walked the corners and.
So an ag piece at 98,
Can you-
100 acres.
100 acres. Can you change the image of that though and go to the aerial? So the ag portion of this, and the usable ag portion of
Somewhere.
this is really the rear of the property, which is what I would like to maintain and preserve. The front portion of the property, if you read through the town plan, it talks about Mill Pond Road having rolling hills and marginal soils. The front portion of the property that I'm looking to rezone actually is, you can't see it from the road, except for the front portion, and it's sand. I have beautiful sandy soil. I'm actually building my house on it currently, where I will be moving with my family. We have an at-grade septic system, which is really hard to find soils to do that. Though the town plan does describe Mill Pond Road, it's really Mill Pond Road to the north of my parcel. So the piece in the back, you can't access from my front portion. The access right now is through another person's property, for the guy to get down and use the tractor. The upper portion, if you want to zoom in there, it's really that section that I'd love to rezone, which is the front portion. I wish I could point at it, but
So when you say upper, are you?
that portion, yeah, there's, and if you move the cursor up towards my neighbor to the north, so the small little lot to the north, no, not the big piece,
No,
the
the
smaller
one that
lot,
says
was
like
it 21?
Oh, the little baby one.
I feel like this
see
is
it.
an eye
Yeah.
test. Yeah, 21. So there it is. There's a pretty steep drop off from the upper portion down to that lower meadow, or the smaller meadow. It's about a 70 to 80 foot drop from the top to the back. So you cannot see any of the fields or any of the farmland that's on this parcel, and you can't access that first meadow from the other side, nor can you access the large meadow from that side unless you have an ATV. And that's why I'd like to rezone that front portion. I'd actually like to preserve the back piece.
So how do you have access to it?
There's access to the rear portion, again, is ATV only. You can't even get a tractor through the lower section there, which is 20-1, where 20-1 is written. You can't get a tractor from that portion to the back. It's too steep. There's a tributary that runs between the two fields. So access right now is, if you go to the south, there's a road that kind of winds down. I want to say the road was improved when maybe it was Velco went in to improve their power lines. There's actually a nice road there, but I don't own that road.
Is that the
And I,
natural gas
This
line?
one?
yeah, correct.
Yeah.
And I don't own that road. I don't own the access. So if anything happens with the portions that are in front, which I believe there's currently a plan in place right now where it will sever the access that I have to the back portion of that land pretty soon. So I'm in discussions with trying to open up another path to get back there, and I'm sure you understand how that is, trying to get access to parcels and pieces, but.
Yep. So when you PUD, remind me again how many houses you wanted, you can do with that.
So if I go through and I get the number of acreage that I believe I have, I would be able to do one dwelling unit per 25 acres. I believe the parcel's closer to 150 acres. So I'd be able to do 6 units.
6 units.
And cut up the front pretty well, and then the entire piece at that point would be residential. PUDs do that when you flip them over. I'm sure I could put something in. I'd have to talk to my attorney in more detail about how to make that not the case. As I had said before, I've got 2 little boys that are going to be moving on the property, and if one of them wants to start a little vegetable farm in the back, I'd love to be able to tell them to go ahead and go do it, and I don't want to talk to the neighbors about whether or not that's right or wrong, or if he wants to start a tree farm or whatever in that backfield. So I can go in way more detail on other things, but there's my case.
Yeah, so if we go R1, that whole piece is R1. Then it has to be subdivided out to put in.
Yeah, I mean.
So it's a little intense.
Well, we've got.
I think that
We've got other parcels that are.
without creating a lot more work for myself, I think that, I'm hearing the bigger concern that Rich has is about how we structure subdivision and PUDs with this, and less about increased density.
I mean, increased density for me, I'd love to be able to have 9
Okay.
units. There's, both would be.
I'll be quiet then.
Yeah.
I apologize. I didn't mean to put words in your mouth.
No, and again, even with a PUD, even if you do the footprint type lots, you still end up with an HOA, you still end up with declarations, you still end up with rules and regs. No matter which way you slice it, I've never seen a PUD that doesn't have those. Normally, they end up being a little defunct if they run a little bit long, just like some of the old neighborhood rules and regs that were created years ago, where you can't have livestock or things like that have all gone past. Increased density would absolutely be great. I'd love to maximize that front portion. But again, I have no interest in doing much of anything other than keeping the back portion the way it is.
So this portion, without going back and reading it, this portion that you want to make R1, what's the,
It's really that wooded line,
what's the
tree.
acres?
It's about 15 acres. There you
15.
go.
That's your red line there.
That's my red line, approximate.
So we're talking about 15% of the property.
Yeah, or less if the
Yeah.
parcel's actually 150 acres, which I
Yeah.
believe it's closer to.
So this one's a little different than the last one. Because for one thing, you can already do what you want to do, as we discussed before. You can get a few more houses in there.
I can.
And so this one is definitely a different animal than what we just discussed earlier. The thing here is, I suppose, to break that off, that becomes its own entity in the back. It doesn't have access. It becomes, again, landlocked.
It's gonna be anyway. It is
Well,
right
if
now.
it's PUD, it's not landlocked. You have to have access. You have to create, I realize you can't get down there, but you're still going to have a access into that area. Where what you want now, that access will be done, but it'll be your piece, straight back, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Yes. I want that back portion.
Right.
Separate from the development that I would do up front.
So you would have to design where your house is up on the road,
Yes,
a driveway or a way to get through there when they do the road.
correct. If I end up, yeah, yes. And I've got to improve I want that field to stay a field. And as we all know, if we leave a field unhayed or unkept, it turns back into woods pretty quickly.
You're
So
talking about
the back field, the big field,
the
This
big
one?
field that, in the section of the
yes.
R1 that you want.
No,
The other
that
big
smaller
field.
field that I'd like an R1, it doesn't matter if that one goes to, I mean, I'd like to put some
Small field?
residential units there. The
Big
back
field.
field is the one that I'd like to keep a field. But I'm gonna lose my access to that.
And by back, you mean this middle section?
Yes,
Do you have a name for this back section?
no, we call, in our family, we call it the land. It's just.
The land.
Yeah. No, actually that back hill is, or that back field has some hills in it. That's where we sled and we
Way
hike
back
and
here?
stuff back there. Yeah, the larger field has got, there's some topography on that field. It looks flat on a map, but it is not flat. You get some good sledding hills. Also vast trails run through there, which is the bridge. You can see the Vast has got 3 bridges on the property that they use. I have full intentions of working with them and making sure that they always have use.
That one?
Yep, that's the Vast Trail. Yep,
Oh.
yep. It's a really pretty piece of property, and I'm happy that I can be part of its history. And I'd like to preserve that back portion. You can't build on the back portion anyway. And I don't ever want anybody to anyway.
What was your point about the forest growing in that?
The front field,
Yeah.
if left unkept, it will just get naturally taken back over. And I'd like to keep it
A field?
a field, yeah. The guy that I bought the property from has hayed the fields. They haven't been used for agricultural aside from hay for as long as I can tell. And luckily he's been willing to continue to hay it, so I asked him to, and I would love him to continue to do that.
So you're saying you're gonna lose that right away?
I don't have one anyway.
You don't have one, but.
No,
Okay, 'cause when she blew up, it said right
Here?
away in there. Yeah.
Or are we talking
Well,
about
when
somewhere
you
else?
Blew it up, it said right away over, there it is.
Yeah, that's not mine though.
Hmm.
That's not mine. No, I have an ATV trail that goes through the woods, and you can get there. You couldn't get a truck across it. And there's a little bridge that supports that ATV down to the tributary, and then a very steep back up. So I've got to improve that to maintain my own access to that backfield with anything more than a ATV or a UTV.
What do you
So-
think, Sarita?
I'm trying to understand, I'm confused as to the fact that you can develop your land, and I'm confused as what you're asking.
It's the tools that I have available. If I wanted to move forward with a development now, I could do that under the PUD standards. Once the PUD standards start, my understanding is that the entire parcel becomes part of that PUD, whether I want it to or not. So all 150 acres would become part of a residential PUD. I would like not to do that. I would like to sell people their own acre or whatever it ends up being chunked up to. You have your acre, your neighbor has their acre or 2 acres or whatever it ends up being, and that's yours and you own it. And then I have what's the remainder of that parcel as mine.
And you wouldn't want any covenants at all, that you develop, you wouldn't want covenants that you would put in that would go with the ownership of the house?
I've just seen, I also own a real estate company, so I've seen those go many different directions. I don't want, normally the first buyers understand the regs, understand them well. They've been talked to by the person that created them, and it's a well understood. The second owner comes in and maybe it's a little bit muddied and not as clear and not as pass forward. And then the third person that moves in and they decide they want to do something different. And depending on who you hire and how well the things were written, there's definitely been cases where that's changed. And I just don't want to put myself in that situation if I don't have to. So the easiest way for me to make it a very clean development and create a development that I would want to live in would be to sell people their own land without any
And you can get 1 acre lots up front?
Yeah. I'm sure I'll have to put in a road. But I'd have to deal with that when I got there.
So you're talking 15 acres, 6 homes. Is that correct?
Yeah, so what is it, R1? I might be able to get a couple more,
So now we're at 8 houses, 15 acres.
somewhere in that range.
That's what you hope.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying you can do it,
Yeah.
but a
Restricted.
realistic number,
Yes,
so we're looking at 8 houses, we hope,
yeah, eight, yeah, there would end up being
after
probably,
you survey the whole thing, for sure.
correct. I've got to get a survey done.
Correct.
I'll have to do a survey either direction I go. Which I'm not looking forward to paying for a survey on a bigger piece of land, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
What do you think?
This one is different, I have to admit. The other one, I was like, it's ag, you bought it as ag, but you can already do what you want to do. The difference really is who owns the land in the back in the end of this.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely would do option B on this one, I have to say.
Say that
I'd
again.
definitely do option B on this one, I'd
Okay.
have to say. I'd like to think about it for a minute.
Okay.
I'll also point out I'm almost walking distance to the growth center in Colchester.
Yeah.
I'm very close.
For myself personally, it's more about where you sit than what your neighbors are. Because you got the duplexes right across the street, I get that.
Yep.
And when the master plan was built, the idea was as much rural as people wanted, again, that property, there was no complaints, they wanted it. It is what it is. Difference is you can change it because of the rules we allowed. And the reason we allowed it was for houses. You want to put houses there, I get it, for myself personally. You know, and when I first thought about this, I didn't think about it so much.
I think it goes back to our discussion that we're probably gonna have later on about looking at our open space.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is definitely part of our open space in Colchester. And I think no matter which way it goes, if it can be rezoned for R1 for part of it, still get open space. So I think I'm with you. Go with B, let's take a look at it, see how it fits.
Yep,
I agree.
I see that. So we're still discussing these.
Yeah. No,
It's-
sounds
it's,
good.
It
uh,
is very
But
sandy
it sounds
soil,
like
I remember
Yeah.
that.
it sounds like it would be a good discussion and be very informed.
So physically, I know your house is being built, which is a nice spot.
Yes.
Where do you envision a road as you look at it, to the right? Because it goes like this?
So there's access to the lower meadow, the smaller lower meadow. Right where her cursor is, there's a farm road that runs down there. So I've been working on lightly improving that farm road so you can get something more than a tractor down there. Because again, my access to the rear parcel, I know my neighbor is working on a development there. And as soon as my access is severed from the other side, the farmer has access on the other side currently right now. I don't, but the farmer is friends with the guy that he bought the land from, and it's one of the, so right by that little patch of trees, if your cursor right, keep going down just a little bit more, down to the trees. Right there, there's a little road that goes down.
Yeah.
Yep,
And your neighbor before this is a guy that's looking to do some type of development?
he's R1. He's subdividing his land, and he's gonna do a development which will sever my access to the backfield.
I didn't realize that was R1.
It is,
That goes R1 to the road?
yes.
I'm trying to, I don't know why it's not showing. I've got them turned on.
Zoom out just a little bit, and I can tell you which ones are R1. I actually have the map here. So where the old farmhouse was,
Yeah.
that is R1. That's why I said everybody around me. Let me pull out your zoning map here. Hold on, I have that. Here we go. I'm gonna hand it to you.
I was hoping Kathy had everything
Where am I? Is it alright if I walk up?
Yeah, come on.
Yeah, we don't bite.
Yeah, we don't.
I didn't think so, I just wasn't sure.
Yeah.
He does have a gavel over there.
Ah, there we go.
Yeah, actually,
Right here, so on this parcel right here,
Okay, so
this is R1.
Yep.
R1, this is my piece. Yeah, he's subdividing this.
that little
Which is
corner
separate in my
piece
back.
there.
Yep,
This
there it
is-
is.
This was the Clark property, right?
So this, what you are looking at right here is a history of spot zoning.
Yeah. Look at that. Look at that.
Those are spots, and they are zoned
Yeah,
in very awkward ways.
yeah.
Yeah, and again, part of the 15 acres was I pretty much drew a line from his property line
This
and went
makes no sense to me.
straight along that tributary that's there and drew the line.
Yeah, I got it now.
Yep.
Unless he owned all that property, he just wanted to have this somewhere.
Yeah, well, there was time when you could pull pieces out,
Yes.
and then this, I don't care where the state came along and said no.
Yeah,
And then we stopped. And we tried to fix a lot of it by, that one was almost impossible to fix, because again, you had an agriculture property that did not want to change. So
yeah.
That's why
So
we didn't change it back in the day.
it's
so you have
definitely
a-
going to be ripe for a discussion at some point, because these are just so weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
There's a few in the village at the end there that are similar to that.
I mean, look how dense this is here.
Oh, those are condo units.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
You
Um,
should drive down there sometime.
Hmm?
You should drive down.
Oh,
there
yeah, I
sometime.
have.
Okay.
Yep.
Not often, but
Yeah.
a few times.
It still has a rural feel to
They
it.
sort of pop up out of nowhere.
Yeah. So, I think that's more discussion on our end. There's no.
I think so too. I think, on paper, as I said, it really looks like it's kind of an easy decision, but we really need to look at
Yeah.
it.
So
We
just
do
out
have
of,
to discuss spot zoning on that one too.
just out of curiosity, if it was an easy decision, and I'm not asking you to make one, I'm just curious, is there even the ability for you all to make that decision tonight?
Tonight?
Well, no, if I had done a better job presenting it and I had made the points
I think-
perfectly, is there even a possibility of, I'm just curious if.
Are you asking them or me? 'Cause
So-
I'm
I have a
looking at
different
anybody.
answer.
So I'll
I-
tell you what I look at. The first time you came, we did have the end of all the things with East Lake Shore. We went through all that.
Yes,
And then now we're looking at, again, what we want to do in the future. And there is
Yes.
one project at the end of the road I personally hope we do take a closer look at, and which will take a lot of time. And tonight you did present a lot better view of what you want and how you want it to break down. To make that decision, I personally don't make a decision in one shot. I have to work it through my mind again, see what the town as a whole, as Rebecca stated, where we're at. I hate to pull the trigger on something and then 2 minutes later say, oh, I didn't think of that.
sure.
But I will, myself personally, will pull the trigger on something. You're not gonna sit here forever. And I think this board's like that too.
Yeah.
We've been pretty good about it.
Yeah, I mean, the only caution that I keep throwing out there is the ship's captain is not necessarily whether or not we should go one direction or another, but when you do write a report on zoning changes, and you just saw it with East Lake Shore, the very first question you are asked is, does this comply with the town's plan?
Yeah.
And the second you write no, and I'm not sure I can write yes for you, and maintain my certification.
Right,
The second you write no, it does draw the attention of the state
absolutely.
economic development offices and the regional planning commission, so.
Yeah, the regional
Even if
plan-
it's a fantastic idea and everyone's on board and there's lots of cheerleading going on, that is a hurdle.
Yeah, and that's something we haven't discussed in previous meeting, Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, which we have to answer to.
Sure.
We have to answer to two entities. What are the end results? I mean, we know what we want for our town. There's still two other boards that will have this discussion. And that's why you've been in the real estate business. You've seen a lot of properties that took decade, 12 years plus, from point A to point B. You've only been on this property a year or two. So
Yes.
if you were to get it in 10 years, you'd be in pretty good shape in some of the properties we've done out there.
Well, actually, Mill Pond Road, the condos, Haley's Way, Donna's Way.
Yeah,
The ones across.
My parents purchased that, and I said this last time, my parents purchased that, I think, when I was 3. I
yeah,
actually ended up selling some of the units there.
yeah.
I will tell you, I probably won't wait that long for this portion. There's timing and there's life and.
Well, you have a unique opportunity for this property, where you can actually build if you want.
I can.
But I realize that you don't want to build it in that manner, so I get that.
I would prefer to maintain the back portion of the property and have it be what it currently is. I would prefer that to stay the case. And I'd prefer to build a development that you're not seeing too much of anymore, which is the traditional old style type developments where everybody's got their own land and there's no tie to something else.
Yeah. So, all right. I think we're on discussion.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
I look
Thank
forward to
you.
presenting again.
You might.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
You want to give him back his map?
You want your map? There you go.
It's a lot of ink right there.
All right. All right. Want a discussion on that one? We'll move to the next.
So that's under B again.
That's under B again. We're indecisive, but we're decisive, sort of.
But I don't think you guys are giving yourself the same short timeline that you
No,
necessarily did last
definitely
time,
not.
so.
No, closer look is, it'll be easier. So we have a continued discussion of the work plan items for calendar year 2023.
All right. It's actually a really nice transition, I think.
Yeah.
Do I have anything quickly in my staff notes on this, or do I just have the list? Sorry.
You just have this. This is the work.
Yeah. Yeah, so we'll just hop down to the list. And you know, I write open space plan on here, but I think that when I talk open space plan, what I'm thinking of is really two parts. And one is like, okay, let's identify like the big, let's talk about what open space priorities you have. And maybe it's not just you, maybe it's a lot of work for the Conservation Commission or, so part of it is, let's talk about, that's gonna bring in this natural land use discussion. The second part is gonna be, what do you do with it? Now, you've just heard me say that when you're talking about open space, that just because you can only put 3 units on 75 acres, those units can be big. They can have big old roads and driveways. They can have big old clearings. It's, I think, meant to conserve agricultural space, but it doesn't effectively do that. And so that's probably part of the discussion. I'm just sort of previewing something that might come out of it is, okay, what do we do with those standards going forward? And so like this parcel that you just talked about, and you talk about like open space and what is the trade-off between conserving all the back, what does it mean for the front? And when you start talking about what you're going to conserve in the back, you naturally start to talk about what kind of benefits can be created to the front to create some balance, right? And you'll hear me preach about this a little bit too. I think a lot of people will agree. You'd rather see those 6 or 9 units up the road right there than you will if that back parcel of that, right? Look at these here. These are what, 10 units? You get 10 here. That has so much less of an impact on open space than if you had a road with a house here, a house here, a house here, and all of a sudden this entire wooded area, this forest fragment, you could call, or this forest block, gets fragmented by those 10 same units in a whole different layout. So we don't necessarily talk right now on what that layout has to be. So not getting into that now, but that just previewing, here's what could come out of that discussion when you start talking about open space and you start saying, okay, maybe this whole tributary area is really important. Maybe it's not, I don't know. But should you say that? Okay, what does it mean? What does it mean to say it's important? Maybe it means you don't bisect it in some way. I don't know. We'll get there. But those are the conversations that would come out of it as we talk about open space. So I don't know exactly what that looks like. And I don't want to put Pam on the spot, but I think that it becomes a collaborative effort with the Conservation Commission. I don't know how much involvement they're going to even want to have. But that's one of the first conversations that you might want to work through when we tackle this again in the new year. Get back down to my list. So that's on there. As you may know, or you've heard me say a couple times, The last open space plan was written in 2000. I have members of my staff who were toddling in 2000. I was at least in college. So it's pretty ripe, I think, for an update. And part of it is work that would lead into your town plan. There is a requirement in statute now that your town plan includes, is it Act 268? I always get, I'm bad with numbers. 248? Where you have to address forest blocks in a fragmentation plan. That is not in your current plan. It was issued just ahead of its requirement in statute. So it was written in 2018, 2019. That, I think, requirement came out in 2019. So you don't currently have that in your plan. It will be a requirement of your plan anyway. So the work you might do on open space will feed pretty well into that, even if you only look at forest blocks in a fragmentation plan or anti-fragmentation plan. So other things on here, I skipped to open space just because of that project, but other things, form-based codes, this is something that you identified last time as wanting to take up next. I do think it's a big lift. It could be small, but I think that we've just identified so many different consequences or results that don't match up quite what, at some point made sense. But maybe it's just its experience, right? It's seeing things and
Right.
talking to the DRB, and we have a standard that might have made a lot of sense on paper, but in practice, it's proving to be really difficult. And there's a couple things specifically that come to mind there, but I think taking a look at them holistically, something that's come up is, how are we dealing with building breaks? It's probably like the number one thing that comes up in a form-based code. Our standard's not quite creating the result that the DRB is enjoying or that they thought was intended. So we talk about like minimum of 60-foot breaks. Well, you have 60 feet, then 60 feet. There's still two big blocks. And then there's, we talk about the relief and stuff. So that's one of the ones, entrance standards, we don't really say, you might say you have to have an entrance, but we don't say what that entrance is. It could just be a door. That looks like it's a back door to something that doesn't really create that street presence. So I think there's some movement there. You heard from the Ireland representatives that they want to talk to you about garages,
Setback, yeah.
setbacks of garages.
Yep.
I've looked at that. I think it's a relatively easy thing to address. There's some language that some other people that have adopted that makes sense, that we could plug and play there. The other thing we're coming up against is, how do the form-based codes interact with our street standards? This is something I hear a lot of from the current developer at the northeast quadrant. That's the one across from the buildings that are under construction now. So our public works standards, just as an example, they don't like T intersections. They like big swoopy roads where the plows can make a nice big wide turn. A form-based code wants blocks. And I'm not saying we have to fix it. I like blocks. But they're kind of running into each other in the sense that these big swoopy curves don't really create two street fronts. It's hard to put a building at a 90-degree intersection that's not 90 degrees.
Yeah.
So that's something that's been identified as, take a look at this. Is there anything we can do? I don't know. Do some of the road standards that are used town-wide make sense? Should they be different in a form-based code area? So we don't necessarily have a different set of road standards for a pedestrian scaled street. So that's something that might be talked about. You can take up any of these, some of these, all of them. You can look at the whole thing. You can look at pieces of it. I still think it's a pretty big project.
I'm okay
think-
with that myself.
Yeah, I think once you get in there, you just
Yeah,
keep
there's a
going.
lot. But it's a big deal.
Yeah. And I will want to have a meeting, I think, with the DRB before you even get started,
Yep.
to hear a little bit from them.
Yep.
I've heard from a lot of people, including some people at this table, what's going on with those buildings under construction? One looks like we envisioned it and one doesn't. So where did we fail? Where, and was it our failure? Was it something? Where did we miss?
Yeah.
So at least we have some case studies
Yep.
to look at.
That was the idea, to revisit, so.
Yeah, so it is going to take some time.
Right.
And we may have to also solicit some experts.
Yep.
I don't pretend to be one, but I know how to look at other people's codes and say, Rebecca, what do you think? Wastewater updates. Oh, sorry. What's
I'll
that?
get back to you.
Wastewater updates. So this is new since the last time we talked about this. So if you are following along with the select board's agendas, at their very last meeting, they took up a conversation about whether or not to return delegation for wastewater to the state of Vermont. Colchester is one of only 2 in the state that has wastewater delegation. We process and permit all of our wastewater permits in-house. It's expensive, costs us more money to manage. There's a public hearing on that next week? Next week. So that public hearing may likely lead to, the draft that's written says that by April 1st, that would be returned, April 1st? Yeah, would be returned to the state. That has an impact on the development regulations that you manage, mostly from a technical perspective. There's a lot of references to a wastewater official. We won't have a wastewater official. There's certain things that are in there that talk about rules that were different for us than exist in the state, so they would need to be removed because we would have no authority to require those things anymore. So it's not necessarily a big thing that I think requires a lot of debate, but there's a lot of pieces for you to look at. And if we want to time it correctly so that when April 1st, when we don't have any administration of the program anymore, well, you know how long the last one took. It pretty much means that you'll have to have a public hearing yourself by February.
This is something we can't put off, though. I mean,
Right. So I think your next supplements, I think 45 is basically just wastewater pieces. So you'd have to prioritize that over the other ones, I think, just in the very short term.
That one's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and I'll try to make it as painless as possible. I'm sorry, I've already got it half written, half redlined.
Yeah.
But it'll take some time just to go through because it's a lot of text. There's a lot of wastewater references
Yeah.
in there. I mean,
I just know when I was building, I loved that Colchester was the one that was granting me the permit. And I just wonder, just what's the downside for residents? Is there a downside for residents if the state picks it up? Is it the same process?
I'm not familiar enough with the program. I think that there's potentially some upsides because at least everything is centralized.
Mhm.
I don't know about the fees being any different. I don't think we charge any more here than would exist. I think the biggest benefit as a resident is that it's less on the tax. It's one less expense.
Yeah.
I think somewhere to the tune of about $70,000.
It's the same process, right?
Same process. You're just talking to a different person. I don't know if the timing is different. I don't know if we process faster than the state. I have no idea. So
Probably.
potentially it takes you a little bit longer because they're backed up and understaffed. But
Mr. Gardner has a comment.
Is there public comment allowed?
Go ahead.
if it's on the program, I would save it for the 13th.
I was just gonna speak specifically about septic, and I think it needs to go to the public and be talked about, but speaking specifically from a consumer side, from somebody who's done development in Colchester, it was much easier and much faster to be able to go actually physically talk to somebody in the town office. And that goes from new developments all the way people that are, needing to have replacements and things done. Once it gets pushed off to the state or put into the state's hands, timing becomes a much different, your schedule is far different than what it is. It may take somebody an entire summer to get a septic system replaced if they're in need of one. So timing and accessibility, having it in-house made it much easier. I'll also just mention, we are also a town that the vast majority of our residences have their own wastewater systems on site, which does make us very different from other towns. We don't have many residential, actually I can't think of any single family homes that are connected to city water and sewer in Colchester. The only thing I know of is multifamily and.
Yeah, I think
gross
the
mobile.
Sunderland Woods might be, but that might be it.
Sunderland Woods,
Yeah.
residence, single family homes?
Yeah.
No way. They're all around septic.
They're in the sewer service area, that's all I know. Maybe they're not actually.
Yeah, no, they're all septic.
They're
Yeah.
all septic.
Yeah.
So I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
that We're a bit of a different, though I agree the savings would be good, we are a bit of a different animal. And we deal with, septic comes up a lot in Colchester,
Sure.
especially with residences.
And to be
That's
clear,
all right.
this is
We're
not a,
Yeah, it's not our
it's
ball.
not a plan, it's not even a planning and zoning department-led initiative.
That's
This
why I
is,
didn't think of
No,
it.
we don't have any. we
I,
have
the
no say
only
in this.
attachment that I have to it in any way is that technically, if this passes, it makes our language out of date and inaccurate in quite a few places, so.
This is, when will it pass? Or when we hope to make.
So the
transition?
public hearing is next week with the
Okay.
select board.
Yep,
Anybody wishing to give testimony
yep.
can do that then.
Just do that?
Or you I don't plan to be there, just to be clear. But I believe, yeah, and if you look at the last one, I think, the public hearing is already noticed, so you can see all the documents already. They're on the, I actually might have even linked them in here.
So the done deal, hopefully if it all goes straightforward, we'll know by January or
You will
In
know
January?
by next week.
by next Tuesday, okay.
Yeah,
that's-
but the
that's-
language that's in
okay.
it says, because of the
Right.
warning time to the state, it basically says effective April 1st.
Okay. So
Everything
our-
in there says effective April 1st. So we are, if we want to be in line,
Yeah, so our next meeting.
we
is-
also want to aim for early April select board approval of development reg
And what I was
changes.
getting to is our next meeting, we can jump right on it, because we'll know.
By
yes
your
or
next
no.
meeting, we will know.
Okay, that's what I want to know. There we
Yeah.
go, perfect.
So if it's
It goes,
passed, we
yeah.
go. If not, we jump into something else.
Okay,
So it could pass the same night they have the public hearing?
yeah, you can do that.
Yeah, I think it's, technically it's chapter 8, so it's code of ordinances. So technically, I think there's some appeal period or something.
Yeah.
That's much shorter than the April 1st, like 21 days maybe?
We tight?
But they only require one hearing because of it's a code of ordinance update.
Yep.
Um,
Okay,
So yes, if that happens, we'll probably spend January at least the first January meeting, just looking at the wastewater red line. Which again, I don't think there's anything in there that's gonna be like
yeah,
controversial or debatable, but there's gonna be a lot of text to look at.
so we'll plan,
It says, Kathy,
Yeah.
these amendments would focus on removing references and requirements in place for administering the state's program. The amendments would also remove current requirements for property owners to apply for a permit to replace their septic tank.
Okay.
so,
Does it have a timeline in there for when it
No,
well, I guess it can't become effective earlier than April 1st if that's what it says in there.
correct,
it says, well, here's the motion, but yeah, April 1st.
Yeah.
so that would get us going, so we should, if, this is pretty straightforward tax,
Mhm.
we probably should do 2 meetings a month to keep on track.
Yeah.
That's good with that.
I
Yeah.
think that this could take the better part of your first meeting.
Sure.
Again, just because there's just so much text.
Yeah, if there's any questions, we get the meetings lined up, so we just knock it off.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've told Rich that I may try to sneak in a very tiny, not just one little tiny thing. We have an administrative procedure in how we send out our abutters notices that I'd like to change. It should be something we should just be able to handle in our office, but for some reason the procedure itself lives in our development regulations, and so any change to it has to get modified. We've been wanting to change it for a while. It's a very small thing, but I think if I could get that done faster, it would save my staff several hours a month and be worth
Good.
adding early. But I'll come prepared with that as well in January.
So we're looking at these 2 items, supplement 45, taking up at least January.
At least the first meeting.
Okay, so we look at
Um,
January as the first meeting for.
Because you
the-
could have a January meeting, you could say, this all looks great, go ahead, warn a February public hearing, depending on how, because you need 30 days, roughly. You could have an early February, a late February public hearing, which would get this to the select board for early March, for them to warn an April hearing.
Then we should get on board on discussing these 3 items. We'll have some time to think about it over a couple months here.
Mhm.
Any
Yeah, and then
questions?
I think because you have to wait, anything else could be talked about at a later January
Yeah,
meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no rush on the next supplement, as
Yeah.
far as we're concerned.
Well, we're talking about supplement 45 though, right?
45 is,
Yeah.
yeah, it's gotta be.
Yeah, we're probably going to have simultaneous conversations about 45 and 46.
Exactly, yeah. 'Cause I mean, it's not like 46 has to, time for them to wait. If we start discussing it, we want to move forward on whatever we put on it, we can do it immediately at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and the open space plan is going to take, I mean, I don't know what comes out of that actually lands in a supplement, or which
Yeah.
supplement it'll be.
Yeah, that's more,
So that's why I have it
definition.
down under special
correct?
projects.
You're looking for more definition on that one, though.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
change,
first thing we got to do is pull out the plan and say, do we like this format or not?
right,
Do we just want to update data and feedback? Or do we want to look at
Yeah.
something that wasn't looked at before?
Yep.
So it'll be a big project. Potential other things, so you have agreed to take up form-based code, you have agreed to spend some time on open space. These other things are suggestions, some of them smaller than others. Parking standards I have listed here. I've heard from a lot of people, and looking at them myself, I do agree. Our parking standards, our requirements, our minimum parking requirements for commercial uses, in most cases, we overpark. We have a lot of spaces that are required. The downside is that is more impervious surfaces. It's not good for the town either, and that when you have an empty space, it just doesn't look good for the success of the business, right?
yeah.
You have a lot of empty spaces. So I think that there's some merit there. My intern over the summer started to look at it, and it's a potential project for a next intern
Yeah,
who could start to look at this
Yeah.
isn't the right number, what are the right numbers? Our waiver requirements are also a little odd. We tell people with commercial properties that you have to at least set aside the land and be ready to pave it. And we try to hit a perfect number. And we all know that 10,000 square foot of retail this type of retail is very different in its needs, even from a different 10,000 square foot of retail. You know, your Ace Hardware is going to be drawing a different level of parking than your Trader Joe's. It's just a fact, but they're the same thing on paper,
yeah.
and we don't have a very good system in place that allows for waivers for it to be flexible. A retail is retail is retail. So I think there's some improvements that could be made there that would be very business friendly, but also very town friendly in maybe potentially having less pavement and less empty parking lots that are
Yeah.
not serving the tax base and not serving aesthetics very well. Signage. Signage is one of the things that came up from some conversations with some folks in the business community. It's not really well developed at this point, but there's been some concerns about, very broad concerns about some of our signage requirements, especially for permanent signs. I don't know if it's ripe to go to you, but I think it's worth sort of leaving on a list somewhere. We'll see how quickly.
Signage as,
Like
sign
business
on your
signage.
building, big time, how many
Yeah, I think some of it's about location.
locations?
I don't know exactly. It's, like I said, very poorly developed at this point, but
Yeah.
I think there was some concerns about, like where signage could be placed on like a multi-tenant building. Does it have to be right next to it? I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, there
I
was
wish I
some
had
good-
more details for you. I don't really.
Yeah, see
I haven't
some-
spent a lot of time looking at it.
Yeah, I saw some new construction, commercial buildings that their sign they had it up, looked nice, and they had to take some down, because we decided somewhere's in our regs that we didn't like a sign here and a sign there, and.
Yeah, I think you can't have it above your roof line
Yeah,
or something.
It was,
and-
yeah. That's fairly simple, though, if you can figure
Yeah.
out what you want.
But I think ultimately, it's not something where I'm like, we need to get stricter about signage.
No.
And it may be something that is requested that still doesn't even make sense, but it's really poorly developed at this point. I wouldn't bring it back to you until it had more details.
Yep.
I don't think it's a big project. I don't think it's a big time. And we're not trying to redesign all of it. Anything else in here? So change in tenancy is another thing that I've heard a lot from the business community. You switch from a daycare to a daycare. It can be a 4-month process to get a permit.
Switching it from daycare to daycare?
Yeah, that's the best example I have because it happened recently. So anytime you change tenant, even if it's the same business,
Oh, I see.
so it's a lot of it can't be avoided because everything is based on wastewater, right? It's a problem that doesn't have a good solution because we ask at a point in time because everything is so much is on its own wastewater, or it pays for wastewater if it's on public wastewater, that we need to know at a daycare, for example, how many kids, how many employees. Well, maybe you add 3 employees next month. You're not calling us to tell us. Maybe you downsize and you lose 5 employees because you just can't do it or whatever. We only look at that number the day that you apply. And so when the tenants change over, we look at it again.
So
and
you
so
don't look at it from a occupancy code, occupancy requirement that this building's designed for so many occupants?
no, not necessarily. What we would look at in a change in tenancy is wastewater, parking, and traffic. And those are going to be based differently depending on the use. Like a hairdresser is going to be based on, or like a hair salon is like number of employees plus number of stations. It's some hybrid. Other things are based purely on square footage. And that's sort of what complicates it.
Well, that's why I'm wondering if you more simplify it, that you go with where, to get a state permit, you have to state what the occupancy is. The occupancy is based on the classification of the building. If it's business, it's, the occupancy is gonna be 100 square foot per person,
Mm-hmm.
and that wouldn't change. I mean,
Well, I'm hoping if wastewater changes, it makes it a little easier, because that's the one that gets really complicated. I mean, traffic in most cases is based on square footage, regardless of whether it's Rich's daycare or Sarita's daycare. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter if you have 10 employees and you have 12. It's the square footage. It starts to matter with wastewater more than anything else. Parking tends to be based also on square footage. Again, I don't really have a defined problem or a defined solution yet, but it is the most common feedback we hear from the business community is like, I can't change out a tenant without it being a 3 or 4 month process. And so I think this is just an attempt to be responsive to that. But I haven't worked out what the solution is. But it is a problem. We've seen it, and I'm very sympathetic about it. From the DRB, these are all new ones again since we last talked. Recreational amenities and open space standards. The language that you have in a lot of new developments speaks very specifically to a recreational amenity. More and more people in the development community are looking for some flexibility there. Can I have community gardens instead? So we're seeing people try to meet that with things that don't take up a lot of pervious surface. So we're seeing disc golf courses like you couldn't believe because it's just a pole in the ground. We're seeing people try to hit that recreational word. And so what I would, probably what the discussion might be are there more amenities or different amenities? Is there more flexibility that we could bring to them that's not just a basketball hoop or something that fits a pretty strict definition. Maybe you say no, but I think it's worthy of having a discussion of, are there different things that you would consider?
I didn't even know we restricted it. I was on the rec board forever, and our term for rec was wide open. Whatever you thought was rec, we literally threw it into the pot. So that was interesting that I didn't realize we were restricted to
Yeah,
rec.
so it has to be recreational in nature.
Sure.
So no
well,
community
I mean,
gardens.
It could be a artist's stand where they paint. I
You
mean,
just
that's,
leave
Yeah.
a lawn, mowed, and kids can just run around or play baseball.
It's not entirely clear, but no.
that's a good one. to look at.
And there's also some feedback I've heard that says we're not, if you look on the whole, are we asking enough? You look at, not to pick on, Patrick will call me and yell at me, but not to pick on, the Severance Corners Village Green, but that's now up to 400 residents. They have a tot lot. They have a tot lot. They have a little tiny playground for children, for small children. It's a very small playground. It's very small for like age 5 and under.
They did put a walking path in there.
They do have a walking
and
path.
people used it.
They do, and that's actually I think that's a great amenity, and I think that if people put that in, it's a good one. So the question also comes in: are we asking enough?
Right.
Can just a grassy space work? Maybe, but is it clear that people can use it? Is it clear that kids can kick a ball on it? Is it a wetland? If it's just a wetland and you're calling it open space, it's not really open space.
Yeah. So you can go fishing.
Go fishing, yeah.
It's recreation.
So I think that becomes ripe for a conversation. I think it would improve. Is it something that's a make or break now? No, but I think it could really improve new developments to better specify what could work and what we're looking to create, especially as the town doesn't want to take on new parks. It's hard. It's very expensive, as you know. So these are all going to be a lot of private amenities. Let's make sure that if we are putting 100 people in a building, that they have some place. They have this outdoor room to go to. One of the buildings over at Severance Corners has actually, if you would never notice it unless you were walking around there, has a really beautiful patio in the back that has like lounge chairs and shared grills and like a pergola and a fire pit maybe. I don't think it counts as one of their recreational amenities, but it really serves the people really well. It's just so privatized. So that might be something that we can consider. I'd put it in the category of it sounds like it's a lot of work, but there's a lot of good examples out there, including ones that I might have written before that we can kind of steal and plug and play if you want.
Perfect.
Or at least serve as a template that you could say, no, make it bigger, make it smaller, make it different. But it could be a starting point. So I don't think we're not starting from scratch here. Lakeshore District landscaping standards. This one I just got from the DRB. It's more about like the shoreline overlay requires you to randomly place trees. I think it's a small fix, but it's one that's important to them because they keep coming up against it. Like, what does it mean to randomly place new trees?
Isn't it like if you build and, because there's like a house that's right across from me, and it looks like they didn't put up any trees at all, when they built their house. And I thought there was a standard that you had to replace trees, that there had to be some screening at least a little bit.
It's not a very good standard. We follow some of the state's shoreland. So we also, speaking of delegation, the state has shoreland regulations. In most towns, the state administers those. Colchester is one of several towns where we administer them. It allowed us to tweak it a little bit to what we wanted. So we say you can't cut down more than 25%. A couple big problems with that. One is that nobody listens to it. Two is we don't know what 25% is once they've been pulled out. 25% of what? They're all gone. We have no idea what you started with. And then 25% for you sell your house 5 years from now, 25% more, then 25% more, all of a sudden there's no trees. stabilizing the bank. I'm not sure what the fix is there, but it is something that has been coming up a lot in front of the DRB. And so they've brought that to us.
The other thing for me is lighting. You know, I mean, at least on the bay, like someone had a spotlight. I mean, it was just huge, and it was across the bay. But I mean, it came right into my window. You know, I'm just wondering if, you know, we could look at downcast lighting. You know, it's just so annoying to me when people's lights, outside lights, come into.
I'm not familiar with our lighting regs. I'll take a look.
Okay.
I can't even tell you if we already do and people just aren't doing it right.
Yeah.
I haven't spent a lot of time with it. I'll take a look.
I mean,
But downcast
not
and
if you're on 25 acres, you know, but if
yeah, downcast and shielded is a standard.
downcast,
Standard. Downcast and shielded so that you have some sort of cutoff
that would be great.
around it,
Yeah.
so that it's not projecting straight out. But I don't know. We may already have that. I don't know.
The only other question I had was, now with the sewer being passed, I mean, I wonder, is there any impact, I know we did East Lake Shore Drive, but are we going to look at West Lake Shore Drive at all in terms of standards and? You know?
Well, I'm actually glad you brought that up because I missed putting it on here. You guys had you were in and out in your discussion. It came up a lot from people in the public. And as we were looking at one standard, it was like, boy, should we carry this over to West? But we all agreed, I think, at the time of, well, when West Lake Shore was done, there was a lot of time put into it. Let's not pigeonhole anything in right now. So it's a possibility. I put it on the list of possible projects if you want to return to West Lake Shore. It could also be something you throw on your proverbial parking lot of, yeah, we want to get there, but not this year.
Yeah, it's not a high priority, but it just seems like an opportunity.
It did come up a lot when we were looking at East Lake Shore. It was, should we carry this over? While I'm still on the lake, degree of nonconformity is a constant battle that I would love to fix sooner than later. So what this basically means is we have allowances for new rebuilds. So if you have a home along the lake, you're already too close, or any sort of nonconformity, but mostly it happens at the lake, right? So maybe you built a little 5x5 porch. You're already in the setback, right? So here's most of your house. You built a little 5x5 porch, maybe before zoning, maybe before the statute of limitations, whatever. You've got this porch. We're not giving you a hard time that you have this porch. Now you tear it down. Happens a lot. Even in my year plus here, I think I've seen 10 teardowns on the lake and rebuilds. You tear it down. We're hearing a lot of arguments that say, well, I already had those 5 feet. I can now build my entire home to that line. And I think the past practice has been, yes, that's your degree of nonconformity. You were already at that line. You were at the whatever line that is. That's the line you get.
Even towards the lake?
That has not been our practice. I've sort of put my foot down and made an executive decision to say, no, your degree of nonconformity is where the majority of that structure was. But it is not as clear as it could be. We talk about degree of nonconformity, but we don't talk about what the degree is. You know, what is the nonconformity? Is it distance? Is it massing? So I want to bring you a fix there. If no matter where it ends up, I at least want it to be crystal clear. Even if you say, yeah, they had that 5 feet, they get it all the way across. Or you say no. But either way, I want to make it clear for people because it's come up quite a bit recently, and it's a headache. It's a headache in-house. It's a headache for the DRB. And people don't really care for our interpretation. And then, as I said, procedures for notifying abutters. More and more towns are getting really smart and saying, cover your ears, Rich. If you want to have an application, you send the notices, you stuff the envelopes, you pay the postage. it takes us hours, especially if we're doing something at the fort. You would not believe how many abutters you have to notify because they're condos. Zach will spend 3 hours stuffing envelopes. We'll drop $400 on postage to send them the agenda. To send them the agenda, to send them, and then once a decision is posted, to send those out. State law allows us to put that burden on the applicant. So I'd like to follow up on that and save our staff some time and money and allow that to happen. But because it's in our development regs that we do it, gotta change it.
How do you police it?
Huh?
How would you police it?
So they have to file a certificate of service is what they would have to do. So they would have to give us basically an affidavit that says, I did it. This is who I sent it to. This is what I sent. We basically become one of the people they have to send it to, and we get to see. And then they certify through a certificate of service that they did it.
Do you give them a list of who they have to send it to?
Nope, but we'll spot check the one they show us that they did.
How would they know?
It's actually pretty easy with our software that we have here. You can actually create, so if I'm looking at this, and I have the Gardner property, I can generate a list of all the properties around it that touch it.
And the addresses?
Yeah.
Okay.
Whatever their registered, wherever their tax
Yeah.
bill goes.
I just thought if I was
Yeah.
a big resident.
Oh, and we would help somebody. If somebody came in and they're just doing something small, they've never done this, we would obviously help them to find that list and everything. But there's just certain projects that are just exhausting for us, and it would really help us out. So that's what that is. That's the one that I want to sneak on sooner than later. That's the end of my list. I have 2 things that you've asked to sort of put on and these don't all have to be in this work plan. And what I'm kind of hoping to hear from you as I've described them, are there certain ones that you have no interest in, certain ones that you might say, hey, Kathy, maybe how about the second end of 2023 or 2024? Or no, I don't want to touch that.
I definitely on the form-based zoning thing. No doubt about that. I think we need to take
Yeah.
a look at that. I'm all over that. Somehow there's a disconnect. I'd like to
Yeah.
know where
And is that Stephens Corners? Is
Yeah,
that-
there's a
Yeah, yeah.
disconnect. There's 2 buildings sitting there. There's no doubt about it. We have 2 different structures. And one of the structures does not look like anything this board ever discussed. So somehow there's a disconnect. I don't know how or why it's there. And if nothing else, we look through it and we can figure it out, maybe, I don't know.
Mhm.
There's something missing. Maybe the DRB can explain it to us. Something isn't correct. We want nice-looking projects. There's no real excuse not to have it in this town.
And I think we could count on the form-based code piece taking up about 50% of your time.
Which is typical. We do one big piece and then
Yeah.
we'll pick out some smaller ones, which is fun.
That's a big development, I mean, that, we should think
Yeah,
about that.
yeah, it's important.
So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear any feedback about things that really sounded interesting to you or not at all on the rest of the list.
Not much left on the rest of the list, what do you think?
She spoiled us. The last one was 100, now it's only 25.
Yeah, this is easy, right?
I personally am okay with just about everything on there. I mean, it all makes sense. It's all things we'd like to look at. How you want to structure it, for myself personally, I'm okay with what works for you on that end. Rita? Any
Okay.
you're okay?
Yeah, again, I'd like to, when we have time, there's no rush, because there's plenty of time, but I would like to, again, give
Do
Lakeshore,
Sure.
West Lakeshore Drive a little thought.
And I'd like to, yeah, and if you're in no rush to that, I'd like to push that one down, only because
Yeah.
we spent so much time on Lake Shore these
Yeah.
last few
Yeah.
years.
And there's not much development going on
No,
West Lakeshore Drive.
not yet.
No, I mean, that may very well change once the
Yeah.
first sewer line gets in.
Yeah.
And we can create a part of this list, what we'll call it parking lot, a bike rack, where you have ideas of things you want to eventually get to, but that may not be immediate.
Mhm.
So I can keep that, a running list of that.
That, I'd appreciate that.
I think we should meet with the DRB. We haven't done that
Yeah,
in a long,
Yeah.
long time.
yeah, that'd be a big priority.
And I've heard from another town department that they would like us to re-examine again what requires a permit. You know, so should we be asking people that they need a permit to put in a fence? Should we be asking people, maybe it's a maybe it's easy for you guys. Just
I don't know.
direction I've received that I want to bring to you.
I'd be all over that.
Should we not require permits for sheds under a certain size?
Yeah.
I live in Williston. If you have a shed under, or an accessory structure under, I don't know, it's like 140 square feet, you don't need a permit. I think that's, I'm making up the number, but
So they
it's,
don't look at a setback or anything for.
they tell you, so there's still a standard. You still, but you're not having to get a permit, you're just having, you know, to follow the rules. That's the kind of conversation that I will not come to you with any suggestions. I will just let you tell me what you want.
Nice.
But there has been direction to like at least have the conversation of like, are we permitting too much?
That might have been because of me, because I had to replace one stone step on, like, but it went down to the water, and it was a huge conversation.
Oh, is that because you were in the shoreland?
Well, yeah, it's like, I don't
Yeah.
think you need a permit. No, I think she does need a permit. And I felt bad, but I just didn't know if I needed a permit, so
Put
I
a stone step in.
step.
Well, I
Just
think
a stone
ultimately the answer
step.
was no, though, right? You didn't need a
Right,
permit, okay.
The answer was no, yeah, but I felt like it took a lot of your time. I felt bad that it took a
Well,
lot.
and that's becomes the question, right? Like, are we spending more time? You come in, Rich, you want to come in, get a fence permit. You're going to spend time on it. We're going to spend time on it. Then we're going to go out and inspect it. Then we charge you $50 or whatever for it.
Yeah,
And there's a whole school of thought that might say, yeah, at least then we know where the fence is. The assessor knows. I don't think we charge much on a fence. I don't think it changes your taxes at all, but
No.
but it's at least worth talking about.
I think so, or
I
at
do
least
too.
a discussion.
So I didn't put that on there yet, but
Yeah.
um,
I know we do a lot of little stuff.
we, require a permit for patios, stone patios. There's you look at the research or around towns, some people say, yes, if you're actually building a structure like a deck, yes, but a patio is just landscaping. We do require a permit for it, should we? No. You tell me. So basically, it's I'll bring you all the list of things that you need a permit for, and you say yes or no.
Oh, that would be good.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
You could also say, we don't have a permit for this, you must get one.
Let's get one.
No, I think we over permit.
Yeah, that could really make some people's lives happy quick.
Yeah, that might end up being its own whole meeting,
Sure.
but.
Yep.
It is very resident friendly. Try to plug in one of those, every supplement.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's it. Other time things, there might be some training opportunities. I've just finished up a round of environmental leadership training, which was kind of fun. There's some really good people at the state who are doing some really cool things that I would love to bring to you. If you guys haven't met Jens Hilke yet, he's fantastic. You will love him. He's really dynamic with a group. And he might be somebody we bring in to talk when we get into the open space and forest fragmentation and stuff. He's pretty cool.
Perfect. Sounds good.
And he's not going to come in and tell you to save every tree. That's not his thing.
That's perfect, too.
It's a very
You have to get a
practical guy.
permit for that?
Only on the lake shore.
Yeah.
That it for that one?
You know what we want, basically?
I think
The
so.
idea, all good? Yep, yep,
We're going to have a busy 2023.
looks like it, okay.
Um,
Staff updates?
Staff updates. Hang on, I gotta go back up to my memo. I wrote them down so I wouldn't forget them. Oh, we hired somebody new. If you've been in, I didn't get to introduce you, so we do have a new hire that started on Monday of this week. Her name is Emily. She comes from the town of Georgia. She was the zoning administrator / planner there. So she comes with some experience. She was a one-man show there. And now she has one woman show. Yes, thank you. So she's with us now. If for any reason you find yourself in the building, say hi. New town center renewal application is in progress. For anyone who doesn't know, we have 2 designations for our downtown. We have a new town center, which is what exists for people who don't have a traditional downtown or a village, traditional village. Legislature created something called a new town center. We have one, it is only that Severance Corner Village Center area.
Is it the village, does it include the meeting house?
Oh, it's not our village at all. It is Severance Corners.
Yeah,
It is,
I'm trying to write a grant, but it has to have some designated.
so we're designated. We have a designated new town center. It's
But
what they
does
made
it-
for
does
those
it
of us
include
who,
the meeting house?
We got a gazebo right there.
we got a gazebo.
Absolutely.
Does it include the meeting, is the meeting house in any kind of designated?
No.
anything?
No. We don't even have it, we call it our village. It's not a designated
it might-
village.
Is it a historic district, though?
I don't know. I could look.
Maybe in a historic district.
It might be, but I don't know if those are something you have to ask for. I'm not aware of the town of ever asked for it. But if it's a designation that's made without being asked, it's possible.
No, it's something that goes through the Division of Historic Preservation.
Do you know, Pam? No, I could look into it, but I don't know. So our new town center is mostly built out. Again, it is that part of Severance Corners Village Center is what they call it, Village Green, where most of the Ireland stuff, McGillicuddy's, that whole southwest quadrant. You have to renew that on an 8-year cycle with 4-year check-ins. Our renewal is up. I don't need any action from you. It's just giving you an update. It goes to the select board to get approved before it goes to the downtown board. That serves as the focal point for the larger growth center, which is Severance Corners. You lose one, though, you lose the other. You can't have the outer ring without the inner core. So it's in progress. We're hoping for a meeting with the downtown board in the early part of the year. We're a little bit behind. We technically expire December. Unfortunate, but it is where it is. So that's just an update on that. State wastewater delegation we talked about. Planning commission membership, just as a quick update. The select board, Rich and I met with 2 people who have applied. The select board is holding interviews, starting interviews, doing some form of interviews next week that may or may not result in a new member for January. Depending on if they're in this round or not. So they're in progress. You may have a new face in January. That's it for staff updates. Informational items I threw on here, separate from a staff item. You had a letter about the Mercer Drive solar sighting.
Do you want the representatives to go and talk with this woman, Julie Force, or whatever? It just seems ridiculous to me how hard the town is working to comply with, the requirements, and it's just, it doesn't make any sense to me.
I can pass along the offer.
So it seems like there's an application in process?
There is an
Yeah.
application.
And you haven't gotten a response to it yet?
I'm not shepherding it, so I don't know all the details, just sort of what's in the letter. So as you know, the town has 2 existing solar fields.
Yep.
We are trying to permit a 3rd. This is our 2nd or 3rd attempt. The other ones have been declined. There was one in Sunny Hollow, I think. So it's just, I think it's like a lot of things. You have natural resources competing with energy, competing with affordable housing, competing with and everybody has their own division, and they all have their own interests.
I'm just saying, I think
Yeah.
I can't speak for the other representatives, but if there's
Yeah,
anyone we can.
I can pass it along,
Okay.
yeah. So Mercer Drive, if you're not familiar with it, is sort of off of McRae Road. Sort of an interior infill sort of space. So that's that update. Anything on that before I move on? Planning Commission meeting schedule, so January 3rd. I think I'm hearing tonight that let's plan for those twice a month. And if we run into anything, we'll talk about them as they come up. I don't think there's.
What's the date of the second one?
So if we're January 3rd, that would make it the 17th. I believe the 16th is a holiday, so there's no, yeah. So I think the 17th is not. I don't think there's any other conflicts going forward. I haven't looked at the whole year. Potentially there's July. I don't know where the 6th falls, but ahead of that, I don't think we run into any with holidays or anything. But we'll take them as they come. It might be that there's just a lot of work for me to do between meetings, and so it helps to take one off so that,
We have plenty to do, so
yeah.
we're looking good.
But for now, let's at least plan for those 2 January, 2 February meetings, and if something comes up.
Very good. Set?
Minutes.
Nope, yep, we're getting there. Make sure you're all ready. Okay, ready?
Minutes?
Yeah, she's ready. All right, now we need a motion for the minutes.
Oh, I'll make a motion that we approve the meeting back in November 1st.
There you go. Second?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. Now we need to adjourn.
Okay, I make a motion that we adjourn our meeting.
Second?
9:30.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
I will not sign off on the next meetings. This was too long. Just kidding.
Set.